Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to this week's or this month's webinar for busy lawyers. I'm Susan Letterman-White. I am a practice advisor here at Mass LOMAP. We're delighted to have you for these monthly webinars. These are designed to bring you practical information in a short period of time, 20 to 30 minutes, and this is information that you can take right back to your office and put into use right away. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Dan Lear. Dan is a technology lawyer, facilitator, and blogger, and is currently the principal at Right Brain Law, a legal technology consulting firm. You can find him on Twitter at Right Brain Law. Before I turn it over to Dan, which I will do in just a second, I'd like to let you know that we're going to have time at the end of Dan's presentation to answer all of your questions. You'll notice there's a chat box. When the question comes up, just put it right into that chat box, and at the end of Dan's presentation, I will give him the questions and we'll get to all of them. We have plenty of time for that. So, Dan, all ready for you. Take it away.
Thanks, Susan. Just want to double check that everyone can hear me. You can hear me all right? At least you can hear me, Susan, yes? Excellent. All right, well, I'll get started. It's really a pleasure to be with you, everyone. And I was kind of chuckling at Susan's introduction because she was saying that this is designed to be a practical series, and my presentation is aimed a little bit higher level today. So I hope to paint a little bit of a broader picture for you. But I will definitely give you some practical suggestions that you can take back to your practice and back to your office, and really hopefully back to your careers today. I have a lot of material, and Susan has indicated that we need to make sure we wrap this in about 20 or 25 minutes. So I'm going to go kind of fast, and I'll be skipping over some things that you can probably see on the slides. But I'm happy to come back to those in the Q&A or follow up with anyone who's interested at the end. I want to start by asking you a question. And again, I know some of you are even driving, so don't take your hands off the wheel. Don't feel the need to shout out an answer, but this is a rhetorical question. In 1994, this individual quit their cushy job in finance in New York City, drove across the country to basically begin a startup, and concerned that they had missed or not gotten into the internet business sooner. I don't know if you folks know who I might be referring to, and this person is particularly sort of prominent for me as I'm based in Seattle. It was a fellow by the name of Jeff Bezos, and the company that he started, it was Amazon.com. And I just want you to pause on that for a minute, that back in 1994, Jeff Bezos thought that he might have missed the internet revolution, and with Amazon, he might have been too slow to build his business. Because obviously today we would think that he was pretty early to that and has become one of the most important, or certainly central figures. We can argue whether he's what he's doing is right or wrong, but certainly one of the most central figures in the internet today. And one of the things that Jeff has said over and over again is, and this is kind of a mantra of his, is that this is day one for the internet. He said that back in 1997. And just recently, last year, he said, it remains day one. And I want to ask you sort of to think about what kind of a feeling that notion of day one evokes for you. I imagine Jeff driving across the country back in 1997 thinking, well, I might have missed the beginning of the internet boom. It might still be the morning or midday of the internet boom, but there's still the whole day or the whole week or the whole month in front of me. And I really, really like this notion of day one, because it gives you so much landscape and so much perspective to see in front of you, and really frames life in kind of an opportunistic fashion. And so the talk I want to talk about today, and I know that this was pitched as lawyer entrepreneurs, and I'm definitely going to hit that theme, but I didn't title my talk that way. The title of my talk today is This is Day One for the Legal Internet. I sort of adapted Jeff Bezos's mantra there. And I want to talk, and sorry, I didn't get a chance to update this from when I spoke at BYU last week, but I want to talk about today how I think that it really is day one for the legal internet. And I want to talk about how you, in your practices, can use this notion to think a little bit differently about how you might deliver your services differently, how you might rethink the way you do things that will make your practices more effective and hopefully more profitable, and also allow you to serve more people. And I want to talk about this in two different categories just really quickly today. The first is, how do we understand this notion of what day one is? And then the second is, what should you do in light of the fact that it is day one? And sort of what does that mean if it's day one for the legal internet? So first of all, and I want to talk about, I'll talk probably about just two or three of these categories, because again, we're going to be moving pretty quickly, but I want to just set the stage for you how I really do think that so much of the opportunity on the legal internet, so many opportunities to, again, share information, grow your business, find more clients are really just, we're just barely scratching the surface. And then I'll give you some suggestions at the end about, again, how you can be a part of this. So let's talk first about how it's day one for legal advice. And I'll skip all over the story about Avo Advisor, but I want to share one quick and relatively unknown story about a gentleman, about a forum called Ask Me, which was an early question and answer forum on the internet. And like many of these question and answer forums, there emerged a legal section in this forum. And this is back in like 1999, 2000, very, very early. And very quickly, an answerer named Justin Anthony Wyrick Jr. emerged as one of the most popular and well-received answerers on this question and answer forum. And it turned out that Wyrick was actually a 15-year-old boy named Marcus Arnold, who had taught himself most of what he knew from the internet. And from TV shows like The People's Court and Judge Judy, and just common sense. And so he was on there answering questions from people, answering legal questions from people, as if he were a lawyer. Now, there's a lot of issues with the fact that he was potentially impersonating a lawyer. But the thing I want to underscore for you was that he became one of the most popular answerers on the forum, not because of his deep legal knowledge, but because A, he was using a medium that people were using to answer questions, and B, he was answering the questions in a very common sense, straightforward way. And I want to suggest to you that, and again, because of this, he was answering hundreds of questions a day. People were actually starting to call him on the phone. People were starting to send him legal matters through the mail. And again, there definitely are these concerns of people impersonating lawyers, and I don't want you to think that this is proper or anything like that. But what I do want you to understand is that if a 15-year-old boy can answer questions for consumers, and if those consumers can find those helpful and meaningful and even actionable, there's so much room that you have in your practices to be more accessible to consumers, so much room that you have to be more open and share more information and help them find you and find your practices and consequently grow your practices. So again, I really think it's day one for legal advice on the legal internet as we begin to think about the kinds of opportunities that we can leverage using technology to grow our businesses and grow our practices. I'll just go ahead and skip over the legal data one because I think it's a little bit higher level, and again, in light of time, I think we'll just keep moving. But I want to get to this third one, which is that it's day one for the law firm. And I think this is a really interesting one. I'm going to give you three examples here that are, again, a little bit higher level, but I want to encourage you to think about how you can apply them in your practice, and then I'll give you some suggestions as we get to the end of the presentation. But if you think about the way we think about law firms today, they really look a lot, much the same way as law firms looked certainly probably 50 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, maybe even 150 years ago. They haven't changed very dramatically. Sure, we've seen the rise of large law firms. Sure, now we organize them, in a little bit of a different way. But the law firm really hasn't changed all that much over the last few years. And I have some examples here of three different legal services entities that have grown up in just the last few years. And I want to talk about them quickly, but I want to suggest to you that not too many of them represent a real change. And I want to suggest to you again that if you really begin to rethink the way you structure and build your law firm, I think you'll see that it really is day one for the law firm, and that there are really lots of different ways that you can think about delivering legal services that could be beneficial, again, to you, to your practices, and to your firms. Let me just talk about these three really quickly. So Pangea 3 is now known as Thomson Reuters Managed Legal Services. And this was a business that grew up last decade, actually, based off of the sort of inspiration that there were all of these English-speaking trained lawyers that were available really just a mouse click away through the internet in places like India. And so what Pangea 3 was, they built up a huge business using outsourced legal resources, specifically in this case in India, to deliver to deliver legal services to complete massive legal research and other types of due diligence projects for folks in the English-speaking world, specifically in the US and a little bit in the UK. But at the end of the day, like this is not really that radical of a model. It became a very successful and big business, but really all it was accessing outsourced legal resources in a new way. There's a company called Axiom that's gotten a lot of press recently, and they are a very interesting company as well. But at the end of the day, if you look at what they're doing, they're really just a placement firm. They have a little bit of a different business model in that they will pay folks who are not actively working for a client of theirs money to keep them sort of busy. But for the most part, Axiom is just a legal placement firm like we might see with Kelly Services. That's common where I am in Washington State, or any other number of kind of legal placement firms. So they really haven't rethought the law firm business model either. There's another new company called Atrium, and I can go into detail on them, but suffice it to say, they're effectively a law firm that has a deep and interesting contractual relationship with a technology firm. But they too are just a law firm. And I just want to underscore that there are so many new ways to rethink the way that a law firm functions and the way that it serves clients today, that it really is, again, day one, if you will, for the law firm. And just to give you a few examples of interesting things I'm seeing law firms, and particularly smaller law firms, doing today, I'm really fascinated by the rise of outsourcing, and particularly outsourcing facilitated by the internet. There are a number of different companies that are moving into this space. One is a company that, full disclosure, I'm working with called Law Clerk. But you don't have to use them. You can use any other number of these companies where they're providing freelance legal resources and making them available over the internet, usually on a per project basis. So you as a solo or small firm attorney can tap into a real depth, but also a breadth of expertise at a relatively low cost using these types of outsourced resources. Another example that I'm really fond of is an attorney that I met down in South Florida. Now, he's technically a bankruptcy attorney, but he goes to great lengths in his marketing materials to sort of not hide, and not in a deceptive way, but to downplay the fact that he is an attorney, because he wants people to know that they can come to him in order to address their money problems. And so he's built a whole business and a whole sort of infrastructure that helps people feel comfortable about coming to him and coming to his organization to deal with their money problems. And then and I want to emphasize that for a minute, with their money problems, quote unquote. And then one of the many services he offers is assistance through bankruptcy. And I really believe that, just like Jeff Bezos said, it's day one for so many of the new ways that we can market our services and deliver our services. And so I think if you can, I want to encourage you to think about your practices that way, because I think there are so many opportunities to rethink the way we think about a traditional law firm that might again, enable you to grow your businesses and help more people in a really compelling way. All right, so what specifically can you do? I'm going to skip over embracing the hacker ethic. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. But again, in light of time, I want to make sure that we get you guys out of here early. But I want to, and I'll skip over to being brave. I think there's a lot of pressure in the legal sector to move your career in a certain direction. You go through law school, and there's a lot of pressure to either go to a law firm or go into private practice. There's a lot of emphasis on the billable hour, and I think that it can be really hard to break out of kind of the way that a lot of people expect you to deliver legal services, and the way that a lot of people expect you to grow a firm and grow your business. And there were just these two quotes that I thought were very interesting and kind of inspiring to me that I hoped would also be inspiring to you. The first is something that I've heard just a lot of people say, which is that it's the golden age of entrepreneurship. And I really think that's true. Today, you can start a business and start an initiative either at a cost that's like extremely low. And not only that, whether it's via YouTube or some of these online learning systems, you can learn just about anything really easily and really quite inexpensively. And so I really do think that it's the golden age for people with ideas who want to sort of grow businesses or grow initiatives around those ideas. And so I really want to encourage you to think about what are the types of ideas that you want to bring into the world, either through your practices or maybe beyond or adjacent to or attached to your practices, and how can you do that? And then this one is aimed a little bit more at the younger lawyers. But I heard this was a quote from a venture capitalist out of Silicon Valley that was talking about kind of how he was seeing the entrepreneurship landscape. And he said, entrepreneurship is a very viable path for top performing graduates in many fields in a way it wasn't historically. And so what he was alluding to is that he sees, masters in engineering and PhD students in a wide variety of fields, and even doctors who, instead of going the traditional route that their education would have pushed them into, they end up sort of taking the entrepreneurial route and starting their own businesses, or kind of rallying around an idea or an initiative to bring that into the world. And that this is a much more viable and even respected field or path in a way that it wasn't historically. And so it's funny, and I understand why a lot of lawyers tend to be risk averse. I'm not sure whether that's a self-selection problem or whether we bring folks into the legal field and then we train them up that way. But I don't see a lot of lawyers necessarily taking the entrepreneurial plunge. I mean, maybe sometimes they back into solo practice because they didn't feel like they had other options, or they, whatever. But I really do think that this notion of entrepreneurship, growing and scaling a business, even if it's a law firm, in a more entrepreneurial fashion, is really a compelling and viable path, particularly if you apply some of the ideas that we've been talking about today. And I wanted to just give you a few specifics about ways that you can begin to try something new or different, that you can sort of flex that entrepreneurial muscle that doesn't necessarily require you to, stop your practice and try something completely new, or, let go of the thing that is feeding you while you try to take your career in a new direction. So one thing you can do is you can start a blog. And I know this seems super simple, but this is a great way to begin to get your ideas out into the world and see if people respond to it and how they respond to it. And you can send a link to your blog to your friends, to your family, via email. You can send it to your clients. But it's so that you actually know that someone's reading it instead of just posting it out in the world. You can share it on your social media channels. But this is a great way to begin to test your ideas and see if the things that you're sharing and the ideas that you have resonate with people. If you feel comfortable, you can create online video or even create a course of videos. again, to see how people react to the content that you have. And if you're struggling either on either of the first of these two, either starting a blog or creating an online video or a course, if you're interested in doing something like this, but you're not sure what kind of content to share, if you're interested in doing something around your practice, one thing I always suggest is, again, create a video or start a blog around the most commonly asked questions that you get, right? If you are in practice and you routinely get a series of questions or one question that people bring to you, that's a great place to start with content creation. Write that down. Again, make sure that you do it in a way that's not specific legal advice, but just purely legal information, and put that out into the world and see how people respond. If you're super nerdy, you can teach yourself to code and you want to start building technology. There's a lot of things that you can explore. And I've talked to a number of lawyers who have begun to explore that path. That's one direction you can go. You can start a community, either say within your bar association or beyond. If there's a particular, again, initiative or interest area of yours, I can tell you here in Seattle, I started a meetup group that was focused on this intersection of law and technology. And that's been a great help both to my career and to my to me professionally. This group is now 4 or 5 years old. It landed me a job. It has been a source of consulting work for me. It's been a really powerful tool. And it's also connected me to a number of amazing people who have shared a lot of great ideas with me. And it doesn't take much. I'll tell you, when I started the community, the legal technology community here in Seattle, it was just me and another person. And we sort of, as we began to make plans to have our first meeting, we knew we were going to send the word out and hopefully people would come. But we chuckled and said, well, if no one shows up, at least the two of us will be sitting here and we'll do it in a coffee shop. And we'll be able to say that we're having these conversations that we want to have, and that we have this group, and that, you know, we're doing it regardless of whether people are showing up. And one other just sort of crazy idea that I've seen some people try is raise a small amount of money and give it away. If there's something that you want to advocate for, if there's an idea you want to push, you can raise some money and you can give it to people to encourage them to continue to do their thing. That's another thing that we've done here in my meetup group in Seattle, is we've raised a small amount of money, just a few $100s, and we're going to donate that to other folks in our community who are building legal technology and access to justice technology projects. So my next few slides are really just designed to invoke the notion that it is day one, and that I really think it's the beginning of day one for the legal internet. And so I'm going to skip all of these and just sort of end by saying, I think it's very possible that one of you listening today, or that some lawyer out there today, could very much be like Jeff Bezos, jumping in their car and driving across the country, concerned that maybe they'd missed out on the opportunities that the legal internet can provide, but destined ultimately to change the world, or to change at the very least their own personal fortunes. And so I know that was kind of fast, but I've left my contact information here, and you can feel free to get in touch with me or track me down on Twitter or email me. That puts me right at 9:25, Susan, so I think I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy to answer any questions if people have them, or otherwise let you go on your way. You have the rest of your day, and thank you for your time today.
So your timing is perfect. I want to suggest, I see somebody, it looks like a hand raise or something, I can't really tell. Can you type in your question into the chat box? If you can, that would be great. If not, I will see what I can do to get you heard. You know what, I have an idea. I think this is Carmela, and I think it is.
It is.
There you go. I just unmuted you. Why don't you ask your question?
That would be great. Thank you so much. I left a cushy in-house job in an industry I'm not going to go into specifics about right now, in order to start my own company to develop software and things that would make people who have small businesses in this industry get easy, inexpensive access to some legal work that they can't otherwise get unless they belong to one of the big companies in this industry. And I started researching the ethics laws in my state, And I had a couple of questions, and I called the ethics board, and they just threw water all over me. And I'm actually driving back right now from a law library trying to research how I'm going to go back to them. Giving me what they're basically telling me is that my state ethics laws do not make it possible for me to develop software that I then sell to people in this industry, and then also continue to practice law doing specific work for those industries, because it's a conflict of interest. And I don't need this, I'm not asking about the specifics. My question is, have you run into situations where the lawyer entrepreneur who wants to continue to still be a lawyer and an entrepreneur running into ethics issues with the bar association?
The very short answer to that question, Carmela, is yes. It's hard for me to answer without, you know, a lot more specifics. But let me just sort of, I think there is a very interesting tension between sort of entrepreneurship and the legal ethics rules, and particularly entrepreneurship within the legal ecosystem and the rules of professional conduct. And let me go on record and be very clear. I think the rules of professional conduct are incredibly important in a lot of really key aspects, and I think they should continue to be something that are central to the way that we do things as lawyers. That being said, I do think that some of them, many of them in some cases, were designed for a world and with really a business ecosystem in mind that is very different than the one that we currently exist in. And I think that, and in some cases, there are some changes coming to those rules, and I think those will be very welcome. So I think that is and will continue to be an inherent conflict. I'll also say, too, that, well, I'll say a couple things. And again, I'll try to be quick. Bar association ethics advice is really challenging because they're always going to give you the least risky interpretation of the rules, because they don't want to feel responsible for you if you act on their advice and then get into trouble. So of course, you know, it's going to be really hard for you to get anything from them that is going to be anything but don't do it. And I've seen this happen time and time again. But more broadly, I will say too, remember that I think both, again, by nature and by conditioning, we as lawyers tend to see the risks, and we tend to see the problems in moving forward on certain things. Whereas, again, the entrepreneurial mindset is to see the other side of that coin, which is opportunity. And so sometimes we end up getting blinded by that, and I think that can be a challenge for us too. If it's interesting, Carmela, I would love, and again, happy to do this with you. If you'd like to follow up with me separately, to be honest, I have 2 consulting clients that I'm dealing with who are right at this intersection of technology and ethics. And I'd be happy to have a quick conversation with you, walk you through some of the things that I've learned and some of the things I'm thinking, and maybe point you in some directions as far as how you might move forward.
And
thank you.
Just jump in and add, Carmela, if you're, I'm assuming you're in Massachusetts, so you have some connection to Massachusetts, but we actually have resources. And one of the things that we advise when people come in with similar issues is, first of all, it's about setting up an ancillary business and being clear with your disclaimers. And there are workarounds, and I can definitely, you know, send you some information that we have if you just want to follow up with me afterwards as well.
Thank you very much, both of you. I appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. Dan, we have another question for you. Could you address the ethics of outsourcing confidential files?
Yes, and I saw that one earlier, and I am just trying to pull up some notes because I want to be sure that I get this one right. It's definitely something that I've talked about in my work with Law Clerk. And let me just make sure that I get this answer exactly right, because I know this is a great question. The short version is this. If you hire an outsourced resource, and there are many layers to this confidentiality question, so I'll try to hit the high notes. If you hire an outsourced resource Well, okay, let me step back. So if you want to use outsourcing in your law firm, it's really a good idea to include some language about that in your engagement agreement. Now, I know we're talking to New England, and as you alluded to just a moment ago, Susan, we may be talking to folks in a number of different states. Not all are affiliated with Massachusetts. So I just want to say that what needs to be in the letter, in your engagement letter, can vary state by state, and specifically it can vary what needs to be in the letter in order to ensure that you have obtained proper client consent to use outsourced attorneys can vary state by state. So again, check your local rules. Your mileage may vary, but most states, and from what I recall, the ABA rules basically say that if you include language in your engagement agreement that says we may from time to time use outsourced resources, that is sufficient to have obtained client consent and put the client on notice that you will use those resources. So in the event that you have done that, that's the first thing I recommend doing. In the event that you have done that, you've effectively, again, put the client on notice that that you are going to be doing that. And therefore, your confidentiality and your privilege would extend to any outsourced resources that you use. This is particularly true, or this would definitely be implied, if the outsourced resources are not having any direct client contact. If they are basically just doing work for you, like research, say, and then returning that information to you, you're probably more than covered on your duty of confidentiality. If you want to introduce the outsourced resource to the client directly, and even more to the point, have them delivering legal service to the client independently of you, or certainly in a more independent relationship, I recommend that you amend your engagement agreement to specifically identify that outsourced resource, or at least make it clear that you're bringing that person on as a separate individual. But at the end of the day, the rules basically say, and again, I use scare quotes there, that that in the same fashion that the confidentiality extends, say, if you're a partner at a firm and you use an associate or a paralegal, in the same way that confidentiality extends from the partner to the associate or paralegal, it can extend to the outsourced resource. But you just need to make sure that again, I think getting client consent in the letter is a great first step. And you also obviously want to clear conflicts and things like that with the outsourced resource. Yeah. And there's the next question right there. Conflicts with the outsourced resource. Absolutely. Yeah. So you need to make sure that you clear conflicts, and that there absolutely are conflicts, and that's definitely something you have to be aware of. I will say many of these interesting new online platforms enable you to get legal talent from across the country. And the way that they do this, just to nerd out really quickly, at least the one that I'm most familiar with, Law Clerk, the way that they do this is they enable you to hire the lawyer in a different jurisdiction as a paraprofessional and not as a lawyer, even though they're technically a lawyer, but they're working for you as a paraprofessional, which means they're not practicing on their license in their given jurisdiction. And in that way, you assume responsibility for their malpractice because they're working underneath you. But if you do that and you use someone who's geographically disparate from you, provided that most of the work that you do is local, the likelihood of a conflict is much lower. But yes, you absolutely do need to make sure you clear conflicts. That's a huge piece and something to be mindful of.
Thank you. These were terrific questions and terrific answers. And Dan, this was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your time and ideas with us today. We will be providing a recording of today's program along with Dan's slides, and they will be up on our website as soon as we can get them there. You can find them, you will be able to find them at www.masslomap.org. I just want to thank you for tuning in, and also remind you that you should mark your calendars for next month's webinar when Judy Selby will demystify cyber insurance. And I believe the date is pretty much like a month from today, so the 13th. But check, oh, hold on. We've got one more question, Dan. Don't go away.
Yeah, I saw that. It's about law clerks specifically, and I don't want to make this an advertisement for them. I just give them as an example because they're the model I'm most familiar with. So, Dan, I see that's from you. Just shoot me a note at dan@rightbrainlaw.co, not .com, but co. It's dan@right, RIGHT, BRAINLAW.co, and I'm happy to answer.
Thank you.
Is that okay, Susan? I know we want to wrap. People are on their way, and B, again, I give them as an example, but I don't want to make this feel like an advertisement. So I appreciate Dan's curiosity, and I'm happy to answer. And if anyone else has questions, please feel free to reach out on any topic.
Yeah, and you can see Dan's contact info is up there. And as I said, we will have the slides and this recording up in just a few days. Yep. Okay. He's going to email you.
Yeah,
all right.
Perfect.
Thank you,
Dan.
everybody. And Dan, thank you so much. I'm going to check back in with you a little bit later because I have to, run.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you again. This was terrific.
My pleasure. I hope everyone found it valuable and encourage them to stay in touch.
All righty. Sounds good.
Take care.
Bye-bye.